I'd love to hear about some of, sorry, Delia, I popped in on you. I say, I'd love to hear a little bit about the video work too, because I think there's this perception that video work is transcends the pandemic in a way because it's digital and you can send it anywhere much easier. But I think there is something to be said, right, about the reason that exhibitions are curated or organized is because they speak to each other in a way. So I think there is a lot of presence for a video to be shown amongst other pieces of work. So I was wondering if, someone can, I know Sarah's not here, but Alison, I believe you have a video work. What's Mamagon? Is that?
Yeah. Sorry, what exactly was the question about?
What do you feel about the experience between your video work being, shown during like COVID when, people can't necessarily like see it, the video work in the presence of the exhibition as a whole. They can go to your website and they can see the video itself, which is an experience in itself. But I think there's something to be said about it being viewed in the context of the exhibition. Has that changed your practice at all or anything like that?
So the Mama Gun piece is actually a little bit older. That was, I want to say my son was like 1.5 years. So that was 2018, something like that. But yeah, I do feel that it obviously translates a little bit better to the screen because it's already, meant to be viewed that way. And there's not as much that gets lost in translation in terms of materiality. But I do think that there's such a difference to being in a space and viewing the art, how it's installed in the gallery, if there's other people, what the room is like, how it speaks to the other work, like you were mentioning. And so I do think that, there's a reason people go to see movies in the movie theater, right? It's different than sitting in your living room and watching that. So I do think that, there's obviously something lost in viewing it on a screen, or, your phone screen is like tiny. So it's a different thing. But yeah, I also think it's kind of funny that I started making these objects in the middle of this pandemic, because it almost feels like backwards. Like I was making work that could be viewed digitally so easily, and then now I think because we've been in quarantine, I've been wanting to use my hands more, and especially because most of my work ends up being sitting at a computer. It's actually really difficult to do with everybody around, because then my son's like, what are you doing? And I'm trying to concentrate on things on a computer. So I was like, I want to do something more tactile. And so I kind of turned to materiality as a response to what was happening. And I'm a total newbie, so I can't say that I'm like an expert in choosing my materials. Kate can back me up. I'm always like, what am I doing? How are these things working? But I kind of happened upon it, luckily. I was like trying to figure out how to make like a negative space between hands. And I was like doing a bunch of internet research, and then I found this like apparently it's a kids activity that you just pour the plaster of Paris into a balloon, and then you just kind of like squeeze it for 10 minutes and it sets. So I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess that seems sort of natural. I'm going to try that. And I really loved the way that it kind of turned out. They look sort of like bones, or like, remnants of a body, but they also feel very like amorphous, and have this like smooth surface texture. So it kind of just worked out for me. I got lucky, but yeah.
I know I want to hold them. I want to touch them.
I want to see if my hands fit in the grooves. So my work was made, is sort of like going from the digital space into the physical space. Because I was sick, I was essentially bedridden, and normally I am up photographing things or making things, and I was stuck in bed, and a lot of times loopy from medicating and stuff like that. So at the time my mattress was like on the floor, and I ended up playing around with my kids' light bright, and I put the words "hold me" on the light bright, and then I I was like, well, I think I'll scan it. So I started scanning that, and I realized that I could pull the scanner over to my bed, and if I had enough energy to sit up, I could scan, and then when I needed to lay back down, I could lay down and use my computer as a tablet and edit the pictures and get rid of dust and things like that. So typically I don't work with, these are in this medium, but it's scanographs. So I was making all of these images through a scanner by my bedside, and there was an interesting use for the piece because at the same time everything was being experienced, especially because it was during the protests, on people's phones. We were all watching like protest footage, and I had friends who were really heavily involved in the activism scene in Richmond, Virginia, which became somewhat famous for their Black Lives Matter graffiti on the statue of Stonewall Jackson in Richmond, Virginia. So that's where I'm from, and I was spending a lot of time connecting friends in the digital space. So, hey, so-and-so's running medic over here, or there's a food station over here, as well as asking people for support. So I felt like I was living on my phone, and using the scanner sort of gave me an access into this digital space in between where I was and where I wanted to be. And I was like hugging my scanner like you would hug a friend, or like wishing that I could sort of transcend through the digital space by osmosis. And so it was this weird intimate relationship between me and the scanner, and trying to get myself physically inside of a digital space. So the work is now is viewed a few different ways. I have been working on some metallic prints, which speak to sort of the luminance of the scanner. There's an old real view of it, so that you actually become really isolated while you're watching it. But the way that it's being shown at Lamplight right now is in a series of 6 images. Well, I mean, you've all seen it, but for whoever's watching this later, 6 images that are sort of fading in and out. And a lot of times when I look at the images, I feel like it's almost as if they could have swam up to the other side of a digital screen and then faded away. And I felt, both because I was essentially high a lot and because I was like in and out of sleep, and I felt like things were slipping through my fingers, it felt very transient and ephemeral. And so I decided to show it that way in the digital space as a slideshow video thing, so that people had that experience of trying to watch things happen simultaneously, and getting glimpses, but never quite being able to grasp unless you really spend time. You know, it takes a lot to view it.
I think it's interesting that you said, you know, how intimate it is, because I think that really, that's one of the first things that I felt when I was looking, is that it does feel very intimate. And I love that you just like dragged a scanner over. I think that's amazing. Delia, I feel like I've been monopolizing the conversation. So
No. I did have a question. I think earlier Liv mentioned, you know, how it's so interesting how motherhood is perceived in our culture, and how taboo motherhood is to a lot of folks. And I was just wondering, like, as you all have dove into, you know, such conceptually strong and vulnerable, you know, moments in your time with your own identity and your own body, I was just wondering, you know, what have been some of the challenges of trying to really, I guess, expose your vulnerabilities and your anxieties and your frustrations? It's a loaded question, so whoever wants to take it first.
I think one of the hardest parts about our culture right now is that everything is so polarized, and I think that a lot of times there's no space for nuance. And so for me, I think through my work, I'm always trying to tackle, like, where is that space where you can, you know, air hardship without it being processed as only complaining. And so I think that's a really difficult space to navigate. And I think that that's what so much of the work around motherhood in general is about, because it's hard, you know, but just because it's hard doesn't mean we hate it, or we don't want to be here, or, you know, we're not appreciative of those relationships. So I think that is a challenge, and I think maybe it's starting to come to light more. I think things are changing, and I think that there's starting to become, more spaces that are holding spaces for work about motherhood. But yeah, I think that for me, that's a big challenge.
I didn't, my past work was not about me at all. Like, I started this work right at the end of 2019, like Christmas 2019. And prior to that, I was doing like abstract ink and acrylic paintings that looked like rocks or collages with kind of bright colors. My work now is completely different. Like, it's different media, it's different themes. And I think when I started making work that was about me and my vulnerabilities and my anxieties, it sort of opened up just so much more in terms of what I could do, what I wanted to do. And I realized that I was creating a space for other women to share their vulnerabilities and their anxieties. I'm collecting, it's not in the show, but I'm collecting testimonies from women about their experiences breastfeeding. And it's amazing to read women sharing this thing that nobody's really asked them about before. I think there's so much attention paid to pregnancy and to birth plans, and then nothing. Like, now you're on your own. And I think women aren't given the space to process. And like Alison was saying, where there are lots of memes about moms who hate being mothers, and there are lots of memes about drunk moms, and there are lots of memes about how mothers handle, the hard parts, but they're all dismissive, and they're all mocking, and they're all sort of, just paying lip service to the difficulties of motherhood. There is no real dialogue where mothers' feelings and our experiences are really centered, because we're supposed to center our kids. And so if we're choosing to center ourselves and our experiences, we're somehow not as good at mothering. And so I think there's this damned if you do, damned if you don't, which is really frustrating. And kind of putting all of that into your work, it's risky because motherhood is taboo, and people don't always want to see it. They don't want to hear about it. They want you to just do it, quietly and nicely and be a good mom. And so I think that there's more talk now and more shows, and women are kind of saying, no, like, this is important to us. I think is a really, like, it needs to happen. I think there's a moment now. Yeah.
I know we're a pretty small group this afternoon, so I just wanted to, open it up to if there's any questions, if anyone wants to submit any questions to the chat, or just pop on the screen to submit a question. But since we are rather small, I was, wanted to open it up to you all. Is there any final words you'd like to say about the exhibition, about your artwork in particular?
I can pop on. This kind of, I guess, bridges the materiality and female motherhood question. So for me, like, the materials that are in the pieces in the work, the newspaper and thread, are both important as materials. Like, obviously news media is a medium, newsprint, that paper is really fragile. The thread is both a material that's ubiquitous to everyone. I mean, we all have thread on our body right now. It's very intimate material. And also is cross-stitched. The medium is something that's often used in decoration for people's homes, or your pillows or your dress as well.